Research Station Kepler-7 orbited a gas giant that looked like someone had painted Jupiter in shades of purple and gold. And Dr. Michael Tors had been staring at the same equation for 20 minutes without processing a single symbol, because Commander Lyranel had just entered the common lab, and his brain had temporarily forgotten how to do astrophysics. This was becoming a problem. Michael was a theoretical physicist. Specifically, he studied exotic gravitational phenomena that might explain anomalous readings the station had been built to investigate. He'd published papers, earned his doctorate from MIT, and generally managed to function as a competent scientist. Until 6 months ago, when he'd been assigned to this joint research team, and Commander Lyranel had made his professional composure completely unravel. The Valthurians were impressive by any measure. Tall Lyranel stood at least 6'3", maybe 6'4", with elegant features that included distinctive long pointed ears that swept back from their heads. Their skin had subtle luminescent quality, shifting in brightness based on emotional state in ways that made them simultaneously fascinating and slightly terrifying to interact with, because you couldn't hide your reactions from someone whose biology literally broadcast their feelings. Commander Lyranel embodied everything Valthurian culture valued. She was a decorated military officer with combat experience that included actual battle rather than just training exercises, and she also held advanced degrees in xenobiology and strategic systems analysis. Warrior Scholar wasn't just a title for her. It was integrated identity, and she moved between discussing threat assessments and analyzing biological samples with the same intense focus. Michael's problem was that he found her absolutely overwhelming in ways he had no professional framework for handling. It wasn't fear, though her military bearing was certainly intimidating. She carried herself with the precise economy of movement that came from extensive combat training. It wasn't prejudice. He respected Valthurian culture deeply, found their integration of martial and intellectual excellence admirable. It was that every time she entered a room, his brain temporarily forgot how to function properly. When she spoke during team meetings, he found himself paying more attention to the way her luminescence shifted with her passion for whatever topic she was discussing than to her actual words. When she demonstrated combat techniques during the station's cross-training sessions, he was mesmerized by the fluid grace that made lethal efficiency look like performance art. He developed what his sister would have called a massive crush on an alien warrior scholar who was completely out of his league in every measurable way, and his coping mechanism had been avoidance. He scheduled his lab time to minimize overlap with hers. He took different routes through the station's corridors to avoid common areas where she might be training or relaxing. During team meetings, he positioned himself where direct eye contact would be unlikely. When collaborative projects required interaction, he kept conversations strictly professional, contributed his analysis, and exited as quickly as politeness allowed. It was not a mature strategy. It was also the best he could manage when the alternative was stammering like a nervous teenager every time she addressed him directly, which had happened exactly twice and had been mortifying both times. "Dr. Tors, I need your input on these gravitational readings," Commander Lyranel said, and Michael realized she was standing directly beside his workstation, looking at him with the focused attention she brought to everything, her luminescence shifting to colors that probably indicated curiosity or possibly annoyance at his inattention. "Of course, Commander," Michael managed, pulling up the relevant data with only slightly shaking hands. "What specifically are you analyzing?" She leaned closer to view his displays, and Michael became very aware that she was close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her skin's luminescence, close enough that he caught a scent that wasn't perfume. Valthurians didn't use artificial scents, but something that was just how she smelled, which his brain unhelpfully catalogued as incredibly distracting. "These readings from Sector 7 show anomalous patterns that don't match our theoretical models," she said, pointing to specific data points with fingers that ended in subtle claws, designed for combat but graceful in ways that made even technical gestures look intentional. Your expertise in exotic gravitational phenomena would be valuable in determining if this represents a genuine anomaly or measurement error. Michael forced himself to focus on the data rather than on her proximity. The readings were interesting, showing gravitational variations that shouldn't exist according to standard models. This could be evidence of the quantum gravitational effects we've been theorizing about, he said, his professional competence reasserting itself when he had actual science to focus on. But we'd need additional measurements from different angles to rule out equipment calibration issues. Can you design the measurement protocol? Lionel asked, her luminescence shifting to colors that Michael had learned meant approval or interest. Your theoretical framework would inform which specific readings would be most valuable. I can have a protocol ready by tomorrow, Michael replied, already mentally outlining the measurements they'd need. Excellent. I'll coordinate with the engineering team about positioning the sensors. She straightened, and Michael felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed that she was no longer quite so close. Your theoretical work has been impressive, Doctor. Tors, I look forward to continued collaboration. She left the lab with the efficient stride that covered ground quickly without seeming rushed, and Michael returned to his equations with the knowledge that he'd just successfully maintained professional interaction for approximately 4 minutes without embarrassing himself, which was probably personal record. Unfortunately, his success rate for avoiding her was about to collapse completely, because Commander Lionel had noticed his avoidance pattern and decided it was time for direct confrontation. Commander Lionel prided herself on observational skills that made her effective security chief and competent research team member. Those same skills meant she couldn't help but notice that Dr. Tors, who was cordial and engaged with every other station crew member, specifically and consistently avoided her. At first, she'd assumed it was prejudice. Despite official cooperation between humans and Valthurians, not everyone had embraced cross-species collaboration enthusiastically. Some humans found Valthurians intimidating, their height, their military culture, their emotional luminescence that meant feelings couldn't be easily hidden. Perhaps Dr. Tors was among them, maintaining professional courtesy while privately preferring minimal contact. But that theory didn't fit the evidence. Tors worked closely with other Valthurians on the research team without apparent discomfort. He asked thoughtful questions about their cultural perspectives, showed genuine interest in understanding their customs, and seemed to appreciate rather than fear their directness. His avoidance was specific to her personally, not to Valthurians generally. The alternative explanation was that she'd offended him somehow, though she couldn't identify when or how. She reviewed their limited interactions for potential cultural missteps. Had she been too direct during project reviews, inadvertently criticizing his work in ways that human professional culture considered inappropriate? Valthurians valued honest assessment, but she knew humans sometimes found that directness harsh. Had she violated some social protocol she wasn't aware of? She found nothing obvious. Their few direct interactions had been professionally appropriate. Her feedback on his work had been consistently positive, and she couldn't identify any moment that should have created personal animosity. Yet he avoided her, left rooms shortly after she entered, never volunteered for collaborative projects that would require extended interaction. During the one meeting where they'd been assigned adjacent seats, he'd spent the entire session angled slightly away, directing his attention to literally anyone else in the room. It bothered her more than professional team dynamics concerns alone would justify. Dr. Tors' research was brilliant. His theoretical models showed creativity and rigor that she genuinely admired. She wanted to collaborate with him, to combine her strategic analysis capabilities with his theoretical insights. More than that, though she was less comfortable admitting this, She found herself noticing him specifically in ways that extended beyond professional appreciation. She noticed when he entered common areas, found herself tracking whether he would stay or find excuse to leave. She was aware of his absence during training sessions she led, wondering why he participated when other instructors taught but skipped hers consistently. She'd watched him work during joint meetings, observed the way he approached problems with creativity that complemented her own systematic analysis, and thought about how effective their collaboration could be if he would stop avoiding her. Finally, she decided that direct confrontation was preferable to continued speculation. Valthurian culture valued honest communication. Allowing ambiguity to persist served no one. She found him in one of the station's observation lounges, a quiet space where researchers went to think while watching the gas giant's spectacular atmospheric patterns. He was alone, reviewing data on a portable display, absorbed in equations that probably related to his gravitational research. She approached with her military bearing fully engaged, communicating that this was not casual conversation. "Dr. Torres, we need to speak about your behavior pattern regarding me." He looked up, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and what might have been resignation. "Commander Lionel, is there a problem?" "You tell me." She kept her tone neutral, seeking information rather than making accusations, though her luminescence shifted with underlying frustration. "For the past 6 months, you have consistently avoided interaction with me specifically. You maintain professional relationships with other Valthurians, so this appears to be personal rather than species-based prejudice. Have I offended you in some way? Violated a human cultural protocol I'm unaware of? Or do you simply find my presence objectionable for reasons you'd prefer not to articulate?" Dr. Torres set down his data pad, and his expression suggested he was processing multiple response options before settling on something that made him look simultaneously resigned and slightly panicked. "You haven't offended me, Commander, and I don't find your presence objectionable." Then explain the avoidance pattern. She moved closer, close enough to read his micro-expressions the way her strategic training had taught her. "Because it's affecting team dynamics and preventing collaborative opportunities that would benefit both our research objectives." He took a breath, seemed to be gathering courage for something, and Lionel realized with surprise that he was genuinely nervous, not the professional nervousness of someone addressing a superior, but the personal nervousness of someone about to say something difficult. "The problem," he said slowly, "is exactly the opposite of finding you objectionable." Lionel's luminescence shifted to confusion. "I don't understand. If you don't find me objectionable, why the consistent avoidance?" "Because your presence is overwhelming in ways I don't know how to handle professionally," he replied. And now he was meeting her eyes directly with expression that mixed honesty and embarrassment. "You're brilliant. Your strategic analysis during project reviews shows insights that take the rest of us hours to reach. You're formidable. Watching you demonstrate combat techniques makes it clear why Valthurians have the military reputation they do. And he trailed off, clearly struggling with how to complete that sentence in ways that wouldn't sound completely inappropriate for professional contexts. Lionel waited, her strategic training making her patient when information was being revealed, even if the revelation was taking longer than her natural directness preferred. "You're remarkable in ways that make it difficult for me to maintain the professional distance appropriate for colleagues," he finished. "So I chose avoidance as the least disruptive option. I apologize if that caused problems for team dynamics or your research objectives." Lionel's luminescence shifted through patterns she rarely displayed: surprise, confusion, and something she couldn't identify, but that made her suddenly feel less composed than her usual military bearing. "You avoid me because you find me remarkable. I'm not certain I understand the implication of that term in this context. I avoid you because being around you makes me forget how to form coherent sentences, Doctor." Torres clarified with the tone of someone who decided that if he was going to humiliate himself, he might as well be thorough about it. Because watching you work makes me admire your intellect more than is probably appropriate for professional settings. Because your intensity and confidence are compelling in ways that make it hard to focus on astrophysics when you're in the room. He stood, as if preparing to excuse himself from what was clearly becoming mortifying for him. I'm aware this is entirely my problem to manage, and I chose avoidance as the solution. Clearly not the most mature approach, but I wasn't sure what else to do. I'll work on managing my reactions more professionally in the future so you don't have to deal with this. The silence that followed his admission was profound. Lionel's luminescence cycled through colors that suggested she was processing information that didn't fit any of her existing frameworks for understanding human behavior or professional relationships. "When you say you find me compelling," she said slowly, testing her understanding of human emotional vocabulary, "you mean this in romantic context, not purely professional admiration." "I mean that I admire you professionally and personally in ways that extend beyond collegial respect," Dr. Torres confirmed, his embarrassment clearly increasing but his honesty remaining absolute. "I find your intelligence, your competence, your intensity, and yes, your physical presence all affecting in ways that make maintaining professional boundaries difficult. So I maintained physical distance instead, hoping that would allow me to do my job without making you uncomfortable." He moved toward the exit. "I apologize for any problems my avoidance created. I'll handle this better going forward. You shouldn't have to deal with inappropriate attention from colleagues." "Wait." Lionel's command voice made him freeze mid-step. "You're leaving. After expressing that admission, you're simply departing." "I assumed you prefer I did." He turned back to face her, confusion clear in his expression. "I've just admitted to feelings that make working together awkward. The appropriate response seems to be giving you space to decide how to handle the situation." Lionel's luminescence shifted to colors that, if Dr. Torres had been familiar enough with Valthurian emotional displays to recognize them, indicated being genuinely moved or emotionally affected in profound ways. "In Valthurian culture," she said carefully, "emotional honesty of the kind you just demonstrated is considered rare and valuable. Most beings hide their feelings behind social protocols and indirect communication. You expressed genuine admiration and vulnerability with directness that—" She paused, searching for words to describe something she'd never experienced quite this way before. "That is affecting me in ways I'm not accustomed to experiencing." Dr. Torres stood frozen near the exit, clearly uncertain whether he should stay or go, whether her statement meant he'd made things worse or somehow, impossibly, better. Lionel moved closer, her military bearing softening into something more personal that she rarely displayed. "I have spent the past months believing you found me objectionable or intimidating in negative ways," she said, her luminescence showing colors that suggested vulnerability she normally kept carefully hidden. "Learning that your avoidance stemmed from admiration rather than aversion I'm not certain how to process this information." "I've made you uncomfortable," Dr. Torres said, his expression showing concern. "That wasn't my intention, but I can see how." "You've made me feel seen," Lionel interrupted, surprising herself with the admission. "Valthurians are respected for our martial capabilities and intellectual achievements, but rarely for the combination as integrated whole. Most beings appreciate either our combat effectiveness or our scholarly pursuits, but become uncomfortable when both are present simultaneously. They want warriors to be straightforward and direct, or they want scholars to be purely cerebral." She continued, her voice carrying intensity that matched her luminescence. "You expressed appreciation for my intensity specifically, for the integration of capabilities that others find overwhelming or contradictory. You see me as complete person rather than warrior or scholar separately. That understanding is, affecting me more than I anticipated. Dr. Tor's expression shifted from concern to something that might have been hope mixed with continued confusion. So you're not completely appalled by my inappropriate feelings. I'm not appalled at all. Lionel's luminescence settled into warmer tones. I'm intrigued and affected, and uncertain how to navigate what this means for our professional relationship and potential personal connection. She moved to one of the observation lounge's seating areas, gesturing for him to join her. After a moment's hesitation, he did, settling into a seat that was designed to accommodate multiple species' physiology, but still positioned them close enough for genuine conversation rather than formal professional distance. I should admit something, Lionel said, deciding that if he'd been courageously honest, she should reciprocate. I noticed your avoidance because I noticed you specifically in ways that extended beyond professional team dynamics concerns. I wanted collaboration with you rather than with other human researchers, because I found your theoretical work compelling and wanted to understand how you think. She continued, when you avoided me, it bothered me more than mere team coordination issues would justify. I found myself tracking your presence, noticing when you were absent from sessions I led, being more aware of you than professional interest typically requires. Dr. Tor's expression suggested he was processing implications of her admission with the same careful attention he probably applied to complex physics problems. Are you saying you're interested in exploring whether there's something beyond professional respect between us? I'm saying that your honesty created space for me to acknowledge that I've been more aware of you than I recognized until this moment, Lionel replied. And yes, I'm interested in exploring whether the connection I feel developing has potential beyond professional collaboration. She paused, her luminescence shifting to colors that indicated both determination and vulnerability. Though I should warn you that I have limited experience with romantic relationship navigation, and will probably approach this with the same directness I apply to strategic analysis. Valthurian courtship customs may not translate well to human expectations, and I'm uncertain how to bridge that cultural gap. I'm okay with directness, Dr. Torres said. I don't want you to be less overwhelmed, Lionel said, her luminescence showing colors that Dr. Torres was starting to recognize as contentment or satisfaction. I want you to be overwhelmed while staying present rather than avoiding. Because your admission that you admire my intensity rather than being intimidated by it, that made me feel understood in ways I rarely experience. They talked for hours, the gas giant rotating slowly beyond the observation windows while they navigated conversation about expectations, cultural differences, and how to balance professional collaboration with personal connection development. Lionel explained that Valthurian courtship involved direct acknowledgement of mutual interest followed by period of intentional connection, where both parties deliberately explored compatibility through shared activities and honest communication. There were formal aspects, declarations to family, public acknowledgement of relationship status, but the core was transparency about intentions and feelings. Dr. Torres, who'd asked her to call him Michael once they'd transitioned from professional distance to personal connection exploration, explained that human dating typically involved more gradual development with less formal structure. Relationships often began ambiguously, with participants uncertain about whether they were just friends or actually dating, until someone explicitly defined the situation. Americans, he noted, were particularly bad at this, preferring to see where things go rather than being direct about intentions. That sounds unnecessarily complicated, Lionel observed. How do you know if you're building toward partnership if neither party explicitly states their interest? We don't really, Michael admitted. We watch for signs, make tentative gestures, and hope the other person interprets them correctly. It's inefficient and leads to significant miscommunication. Your approach of just stating intentions directly is probably much more effective. Then we'll combine approaches. Lionel decided with the same strategic thinking she applied to security assessments. Direct about interest and intentions like Valthurian courtship, but flexible about development pace like human dating. We'll be explicit about what we want while being patient with cultural learning curves. They established parameters. Their professional responsibilities remained primary. Both had research and security roles that required appropriate boundaries. Personal relationship exploration needed to occur in ways that didn't compromise station operations or team dynamics. They would be transparent with station leadership about developing relationship to avoid appearance of conflicts of interest. Though that conversation with the station director will be awkward, Michael noted. Lionel's luminescence shifted to definite amusement. You just admitted profound admiration to a Valthurian warrior scholar you've been avoiding for 6 months. I suspect informing the station director that we're exploring romantic connection will be comparatively simple. Their first deliberate date, Michael's term, which Lionel adopted after he explained that humans needed formal romantic context to distinguish personal time from casual socializing, occurred 3 days later in the station's hydroponics bay. It was quiet, beautiful with earth and Valthurian plants creating alien garden, and private enough for conversation without being isolated in ways that might seem inappropriate. I should admit something, Michael said as they walked through rows of flowering plants that released scents designed to remind crew members of home despite being light years from Earth or Volterra. I still find you overwhelming. Your intelligence, your confidence, your presence, all of it. I'm working on not avoiding you, but I'm not sure the overwhelmed part will change just because we're deliberately spending time together. Good, Lionel replied, her luminescence showing warmth that made the hydroponics bay's lighting almost redundant. Because your admission that you admire my intensity rather than wanting me to diminish it, that's why your attention affects me the way it does. Most beings want me to be less intense, more accommodating, softer. You seem to appreciate me being exactly who I am. She continued, I am warrior scholar. That integration isn't separation I can maintain. My strategic thinking is informed by military training. My combat effectiveness is enhanced by analytical capabilities. Trying to appreciate one aspect while being uncomfortable with the other would be like admiring someone's intelligence while wishing they were less perceptive. You seem to understand that they're inseparable. Because separating those aspects seems artificial, Michael agreed. Your intensity in combat and intensity in research are expressions of the same fundamental nature. Trying to appreciate one without the other would miss the essential wholeness of who you are. Lionel stopped walking, turned to face him with luminescence that practically glowed. That understanding of integrated identity. That's why your admiration affects me so profoundly when others' appreciation feels incomplete. You see me as complete person rather than collection of impressive but separate attributes. They continued their walk, conversation flowing easily now that the tension of avoidance had been replaced with intentional connection. They discovered their professional approaches complemented each other remarkably well. Michael's creative theoretical leaps benefited from Lionel's systematic strategic analysis, while her threat modeling gained dimension from his ability to consider unlikely but theoretically possible scenarios. We should collaborate on the Sector 7 anomaly analysis, Lionel said. Combining your theoretical framework with my strategic assessment could produce insights neither of us would reach independently. I'd like that, Michael replied, though I should warn you that working together might reveal that I'm significantly less impressive when you can observe my actual research process. Right now you're seeing polished results. You might be disappointed by the messy reality of how I actually develop theories. I doubt that, Lionel said. But if your process is as chaotic as you suggest, perhaps my systematic approach can provide useful structure. That's what collaboration means, leveraging complementary strengths rather than expecting perfection from either party. Over the following months, their relationship developed alongside their professional collaboration in ways that proved both personally fulfilling and professionally productive. They worked together on research projects that combined his astrophysics expertise with her strategic systems knowledge, producing analyses that advanced understanding of the gravitational anomalies the station had been built to investigate. Their collaboration revealed that Michael's chaotic research process was actually creative exploration that benefited from Lyranel's structured analysis, while her systematic approach gained flexibility from his willingness to consider unconventional theoretical possibilities. They published 2 joint papers that earned recognition from both human and Valthurian scientific communities, and their work informed security protocols for investigating potentially dangerous phenomena. They also trained together, Michael learning Valthurian combat techniques that emphasized efficiency and precision, while Lyranel studied human martial arts that integrated different philosophical approaches to physical discipline. She appreciated how human fighting styles emphasized adaptation and improvisation, while Michael found that Valthurian techniques' systematic rigor gave him frameworks for understanding combat principles he'd previously approached intuitively. "Your people see combat as problem-solving," Michael observed during one training session after Lyranel had thoroughly demonstrated superior technique. "Every move serves specific strategic purpose. It's like watching chess played at full speed with lethal consequences. Your people see combat as expression of individual creativity within frameworks," Lyranel replied, her luminescence showing colors that indicated she was pleased by his analysis. "You value adaptation over absolute technical precision, which makes your fighters unpredictable in ways that challenge opponents trained in more rigid systems." They navigated cultural differences with the same directness they'd applied to initial relationship discussions. When Michael's indirect communication style conflicted with Lyranel's preference for explicit statements, they addressed it directly rather than letting misunderstanding fester. When Valthurian emotional displays through luminescence overwhelmed Michael's human processing capacity, they established signals for when he needed time to catch up with what her biology was broadcasting. "Your luminescence is showing colors I haven't seen before," Michael said during a private dinner in his quarters. "I'm not sure if that means you're happy, anxious, or experiencing something I don't have vocabulary for." "It means I'm content with underlying anticipation about our developing relationship," Lyranel explained. "Valthurian emotional displays include nuances that don't translate directly to human emotional categories. What you're seeing is satisfaction mixed with hope about future connection. Essentially, I'm happy with you while being excited about continuing to build this partnership." "That's actually really nice," Michael said, "though it's slightly intimidating that I can't hide my reactions when I'm trying to be mysterious or surprising." "You're not particularly skilled at being mysterious," Lyranel observed with amusement clear in her luminescence. "Your face broadcasts your thoughts almost as clearly as my skin shows my emotions. I can read when you're nervous, excited, overwhelmed, or trying to determine if something you said was appropriate. It's endearing rather than problematic." The station crew adapted to their relationship with varying degrees of acceptance. Some found their cross-species romance interesting and positive, evidence that cooperation between humans and Valthurians could extend beyond professional collaboration. Others questioned whether it was appropriate for senior staff members to be personally involved, suggesting it created potential conflicts of interest. But their professional competence remained unquestionable. Their collaborative research produced valuable results, their security assessments were thorough and well-reasoned, and they maintained appropriate boundaries between personal relationship and professional responsibilities. The station director accepted their relationship with the pragmatic acknowledgement that adults were entitled to personal lives as long as those lives didn't compromise station operations. 6 months into their acknowledged relationship, Michael and Lionel stood in the observation lounge where their connection had begun, where she'd confronted him about his avoidance, and he'd admitted the truth that changed everything. "I have admission," Lionel said, her luminescence showing contentment with underlying amusement. "I'm still uncertain how to navigate romantic relationship complexity, and I probably approach emotional connection with too much strategic analysis. I create frameworks and protocols for something that humans seem to think should be more spontaneous." "I still find you overwhelming," Michael replied with matching honesty. "Your brilliance, your intensity, your confidence, all of it. I've mostly stopped avoiding you, but the being overwhelmed part remains constant. Every time you're passionate about research or demonstrate combat technique or just exist in my vicinity, my brain temporarily forgets how to function properly." "Good," Lionel said, moving closer with deliberate intent. "Because if you stopped being affected by my presence, I'd wonder if you were still genuinely engaged rather than just comfortable with routine. Your admission that you admire my intensity rather than wanting to diminish it, that's why this works. You don't want me to be less than I am." She continued, "Most beings appreciate parts of me while being uncomfortable with the whole. They like my intelligence but find my directness harsh. They respect my combat skills but are intimidated by my intensity. They want warrior or scholar, never both simultaneously. You seem to want all of it. The integration that makes me who I am rather than separate attributes you appreciate independently. Because separating those aspects would be artificial," Michael said, echoing what he'd told her months ago. "You're not warrior plus scholar. You're warrior-scholar as integrated identity where each aspect informs and enhances the other. Appreciating one without the other would miss the essential you." Lionel's luminescence shifted to colors that Michael had learned meant profound emotional impact, the shade that appeared when she was deeply moved by something. "That understanding is why I chose to pursue this connection rather than accepting your avoidance as permanent state. Because beings who see me that completely are rare, and building relationship with someone who truly sees me felt worth the complexity of cross-species romance." They stood together, watching the gas giant's atmospheric patterns through the observation windows, comfortable in shared silence that came from months of building understanding across significant cultural differences. "Thank you," Lionel said eventually, "for being honest when I confronted you, for expressing admiration despite knowing it might be unwelcome or inappropriate. Your courage to be vulnerable created space for connection I didn't know I wanted until you demonstrated it was possible." "Thank you for confronting me," Michael replied, "for not accepting avoidance as permanent state, for being direct enough to force honesty that I might never have volunteered otherwise, and for understanding that being overwhelmed by you is expression of admiration rather than discomfort." The alien woman had asked why he avoided her, expecting fear or prejudice or professional disagreement. His honest reply, that she overwhelmed him with admiration he didn't know how to express appropriately, had left her completely silent, challenging assumptions she'd held about how others perceived her intensity and integrated identity. That silence had become foundation for connection. Neither had anticipated, but both chose to build deliberately, proving that sometimes honesty is the most revolutionary act